issues that are really prevalent in our communities. This is an opportunity for us to come in and actually listen to all of you who live every day in these communities, who have ideas and solutions. And we are really here in partnership with one another, the Office of the Public Defender and the Attorney General, but also with community. So thank you for having us and welcoming us here today. How are you?
Great. First of all, it's great to be here with the Office of Public Defender and their team. And I team here, the Office of Attorney General, where issues are discussed, problems are identified, and quite frankly, solutions are, emerged. When I was Lieutenant Governor and we were taking on issues like health disparities, particularly in communities of color, we started our listening in the barbershop, in the community, not to pretend that we somehow know all the answers to these challenges. It's great to be here this morning, and we got a number of other jobs and other barbershops later today. We're here to listen. We have a challenge that we have problem in our criminal system. Disproportionately impacting young black and brown men. I'm committed here to address these issues together. Sometimes people ask me and say, well, how is it that the OAG and the OPD are partnering? I said, because we're all committed to ensuring that our systems of justice are fair and equitable. And that's our responsibility to do that. And that's true whether we're in the courtroom or when we're sitting around the table in the community to identify and bring solutions so that we've got a better system that serves everybody. So it's great to be here. Thanks, Jabari. Thanks, Natasha.
All fade, lead the top, shake up the face.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, cool. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right. Sorry for the delay. Didn't know so many people was coming, but it's all good. It's all good. We are here. We're in a small spot. I am the owner of Conscious Heads Barbershop, Natural Hair Salon, which is downstairs. Been here 23 years. Just celebrated our 23-year anniversary on August 17th. So we proud about that. Down in the basement, we do braids, we do locks, we do makeup downstairs. And up here for the past 6 years, we've been training barbers, all throughout the city. Young as the age of 10, and my oldest student, believe it or not, is 73 years old. So we've been doing it. It's been successful. Everybody that works on my floor downstairs, everybody's not there today, but everyone that works downstairs comes from the boot camp, besides one person that's in the back. So I've done over 8 different apprenticeships, throughout the years, which is really big throughout the state of Maryland. I have 3 master barbers that's underneath of me that have their own shops, and they take in some of the barbers from the program, and they actually help them to get their license also. So it's been successful. We got young ladies, we got young men, so we cover quite a few things. Our thing is to bring the integrity back into the whole barbering industry. It's a lot of barbers that's out cutting out in the community now. Most of them don't have licenses, but but I mean, we just being real, keeping 100%, but we try to encourage people to get that license, because there's a lot of stuff you don't know about skin disease, health, and just a lot of different things that you need to know in this field, so that's what the whole thing is. So thank y'all for coming here today. So I guess we can go. My client is brother Dayvon Love, and I appreciate this brother. You want me to tell about the story? So Dayvon Love been cutting his hair for years. We got a law change. I got a law change that first you used to only get 1 master barber to 1 apprenticeship at one time. In 2019, I came to brother Dayvon. I was cutting his hair. I came from a barbering meeting, and I asked him, what do I need to do to get the law change in the state of Maryland so that we can do more than just 1 apprenticeship at a time? Dayvon just walked me through it. Like I thought it was something that I was gonna have to do for like 2-3 years. It was gonna cost me $100,000, and it was just gonna be something that was gonna be crazy. But he like, no, just contact Delicate. He gave me the person to contact. I did it the same day. I met with her maybe the next week. At the time, it was Delicate Glenn at the time who put it in, and we put it through that year, and we got it passed. However, the wording was wrong on there so far as apprenticeship, so they didn't recognize it at the state board. we had to go back to next year with Delegate Kurt Anderson the next year, and COVID came, they knocked it off the table. Had to put it back in to Delegate Stephanie Glenn and Smith the following year, and then it finally went through with the right language and everything. So we got that done. So now through the state of Maryland, everyone could do 3 apprenticeships under Master Barber. So he helped me with that and other things also, but he definitely helped me to put that in place, make my program stronger. Yeah.
All right. I'm Dayvon Love. I'm Director of Public Policy and Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Grassroots think tank based out of Baltimore, statewide policy, unapologetically Black in our perspective and analysis in terms of what we represent, revolutionary perspective. One of the things I actually want to highlight for what Jabari just mentioned, not only has Jabari been cutting my hair for years, but also, an organization he founded years ago, Survivors Nation, and their lecture series, Reality Speaks. So Baltimore is a place where a lot of radical, revolutionary Pan-African nationalists, lecturers, and intellectuals have come through Baltimore through Jabari. And so I remember, in my formative years, coming to Jabari lectures. And so a lot of the kind of intellectual foundation of my work, Jabari has a lot to do with in terms of bringing some of those crucial folks here. So in addition to this being, a barbershop where, Black people, come and talk and have, important conversations, this barbershop in particular is unique given its contribution to, Black consciousness and revolutionary consciousness throughout the city. So I just wanted to recognize that before I jump into what I do. Willie, how much do you want me to do? You want me to introduce the organization and talk about some of our work on criminal justice? Got it. So what I'll do briefly is LBS, my organization, was founded in 2010. Many of us former policy debaters, and our emphasis was around, racial justice and challenging racism and white supremacy in the activity of debate. So we formed LBS as a think tank in 2010, and the first issues that we actually started to address was criminal justice related issues, because those were the issues that most were directly impacting the communities that we were in touch with. So you look at the mass arrest policy in Baltimore City between 1999 and 2006, 757,000 legal arrests. And as a person who at the time was a high school teacher, debate coach, I was just seeing a lot of young people being exposed to the criminal justice system. And so one of the things that I want to say, really, when we talk about mass incarceration, how it's impacted our community, and you think about a population of people that this society has deemed, disposable. I think several years ago during the 2016 presidential election, you had the emergence of the reemergence of that conversation around super predator. That was one of the, apprehensions that people had around, supporting Hillary Clinton, and even thinking about, Joe Biden and his role in the crime bill in '94. So that's something that discourse reemerged. And I think what we see is that the notions of inherent Black criminality, the societal notion and societal propaganda around notions of inherent Black pathology has made large swaths of our community deemed disposable. And so in many ways, there are people who suffer under the weight of the criminal justice system over the past several decades that for a long time, I think, suffered quietly because of those notions of inherent pathology and criminality. And so what I'll say is that the work that we've tried to do, understanding that it is the policies around, whether it's mandatory minimum sentencing, sentence enhancements, whether it's the lack of access to alternatives to incarceration, those are things that we've emphasized. And I do want to thank the Public Defender's Office, which I don't think gets enough credit for the role that they played over the years, in being one of the kind of main lines of defense against our community against that criminalization. And also, the Attorney General Brown, who, last session, one of the bills that we were going to partner on and will likely partner on in this coming session is around a pattern and practice bill, a bill that would authorize the Attorney General to do pattern and practice investigations of law enforcement departments around the state, similar to what the Department of Justice has been able to do around the country. So I'll stop there. I know I talked a long time, so I'll leave it at that.
goal of this engagement is to build a grassroots foundation so that mass incarceration can be a topic that we can tackle. The question for you is to the people on the stage so they can present.
Where's one of those microphones at?
So,
What I would do is go back, this is our opportunity to hear kind of solutions from the ground level. So Dayvon, in response to what you said, my question to you is, for us at the Public Defender's Office, we defend individuals, and it is our duty to defend the rights of individuals. How do you see, and what do you see is needed, or where do you see solutions that we can assist, and we being the Public Defender's Office and the Attorney General's Office, where do you see solutions coming from?
So I would say this, in this current climate where, spikes in crime and violence are high, one of the things that has happened is that in many ways it has impacted the ability to move important criminal justice reforms, and it has animated in some ways legislative attempts by certain forces in this state to put forward policies that replicate the war on drugs and mass incarceration era. So whether it's like State's Attorney Schellenberger or Ivan Bates, who have advocated, for instance, the repeal of the Child Interrogation Protection Act publicly, and Fox 45's like propaganda machine and fear mongering around that. I think what has happened is it has made, and what happens is in both those two individuals that I mentioned and Fox 45, they put out the most extreme examples of violence and brutality and then legislate to that. They legislate to those extreme circumstances, and the laws that they attempt to pass, while they focus on those extreme circumstances, they don't recognize is that the impacts that those policies will have on the vast majority of people for which are not those extreme examples of brutality. Someone, for instance, and again, you would know this better than many of us, where people who, they may live in a community where they feel like they have to have a gun to protect themselves. They're not a person who is like the driver of violence in our community, but they happen to have a firearm. It's a rational decision. And I think one of the things that I know will be helpful from the Public Defender's Office is being able to put out material that exposes the public to the fact that there are lots of cases that aren't those extreme cases that they put on Fox 45, and that prosecutors often use to support their harsh, tough on crime policies, to put out more examples to the public as to those examples where, again, someone just happens to be in a car where there's a firearm. They didn't know it was there, right? But they're being charged and prosecuted with the politicization of, addressing crime and violence, not allowing, judges to be able to have the discretion to assess a circumstance and say, this isn't a person that needs to, do a maximum sentence, right? And so I think putting out more of those stories to combat the sensationalism that unfortunately I think is putting pressure on our legislators, again, to legislate to those most extreme circumstances, fuel mass incarceration.
My follow-up to you is you also are interested in solutions before individuals get to the court. I personally would like less cases at the Office of the Public Defender's Office. So I'm also seeking solutions where we can basically just cut that off so that we are providing resources, perhaps, that services within the community. Where do you see the greatest need to basically cut off what has been created, this pipeline that has led to mass incarceration?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that is important, I think, for people to know is that law enforcement has been the primary program that this society has funded to address itself to public safety. And that has come at the expense of other kinds of investments that are proven to be more effective. So for instance, I want to, praise and give a shout out to We Are Us, a group of, sisters and brothers in Baltimore that have been doing grassroots work in terms of doing violence prevention. These are many of them people who are formally, engaged in, violence and street activity, clergy. other people who have credibility with people on the ground. Those are folks who deserve way more investment. Baltimore Peace Movement, if you may, it used to be Baltimore Ceasefire 365, that was Baltimore Peace Movement. Those are examples of the kinds of violence prevention that's community-based that needs to be funded. And I think it's important for people to understand the disparities that there is in terms of funding for law enforcement versus those kind of programs. I think this, a couple of years ago, Baltimore broke the $500 billion amount in terms of how much it invests in law enforcement. And that trend has gone up every year. That trend is a national trend in terms of law enforcement and the funding for it. So again, I say that to say that what pales in comparison to that are the resources that community-based organizations like We Are Us and Baltimore Peace Movement get. And there are a bunch of other folks. I'm shouting those two out in particular, but there are lots of other like community-based violence prevention organizations. A project that I'm working on, the Baltimore Rites of Passage Initiative. African-centered rites of passage is in a process where young people go through identity formation rooted in traditional African culture. And a lot of the research that has been done on African-centered rites of passage shows that it's a powerful deterrent, particularly for Black men, to engage in violent crime, and antisocial behavior. So those are just examples of the kinds of things that, as simple as it is, more investment in those kind of programs. Unfortunately, there hasn't been the same political will to invest in those kinds of programs as there has been to invest in law enforcement.
What do you say to, and I've had conversations, and what I hear from members of the General Assembly is essentially, if we create these programs and provide these programs, that is still not a guarantee that individuals are going to show up. Because, one of the things I always throw out there is the fact that we have this issue, especially with juveniles in Baltimore City, and why they're hanging out at the Inner Harbor. And I push back and I'm like, well, why are the various centers closed? Like, for example, we had this summer where our pools were closed. And there are other communities throughout the state, though, where they have pools and they have parks that are open. And the argument is that simply because you open these facilities does not mean that especially the children or the people will come. What is your thought being in the community in terms of when individuals say that?
Yeah, so I'll say two things to that. One is that one of the things that my organization has been fairly vocally critical of for many years is the nonprofit industrial complex. Black suffering, there's a industry that profiteers off the suffering of Black people. And unfortunately, you have a lot, particularly of like white folks that come into Black communities, may be well-meaning, they may have an understanding of the sociology of oppression. But in terms of like being immersed in the communities impacted by, the war on drugs, immersed in, the community's history, tradition, cultures of people of African descent, these are folks that are delinquent really in that immersion. And so what you have is a lot of programs that come into the community that are able to get funding and resources, but are not effective. And often that actually gets blamed on Black people. Like a lot of times when you think about the resources that are spent in social programs, often those programs are not programs that are community led and based, right? But they're based and often led by nonprofit professionals that don't have the resources. So again, take the brother Jabari, and all the programming that's been done over the years, in my conversations with Jabari over the years, there was a zero murder rate movement, right?
Yeah.
Work that he was doing with folks in the community. That's not something that gets a lot of resources, right? And that's not something that's widely known. So the first thing I would say is that, it's important that we think about the fact that the kinds of programs that get funded tend not to be the programs that are truly community-based, and that's why there's, in times, a lack of effectiveness. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing I would say is that to the extent that there has been some investment, to the extent that there has been some access to things like recreation and some of the examples you gave, part of the challenge is that, that those kinds of investments, you can only expect incremental outcomes from it, right? That what we need, when you think about this society and the societal propaganda, white supremacy, and notion of anti-Blackness, the damage that's been done to people of African descent is deep. And so we can't expect, a couple of programs to undo the universe of oppression that our community has faced. And so, while, there's certainly examples where those programs don't work, or that individual who goes to a program, ends up reoffending, that shouldn't be a justification to go in the opposite direction, because what we know is that the direction that this society has gone in terms of focusing on mass incarceration has just not been effective in terms of public safety or improving the quality of life of our community. We know that that doesn't work. And so even though there may be hiccups in some, again, the examples you gave, that's not a reason not to pursue the path that I'm describing.
So I have a question.
Well, he got one on him.
I got it. You got me? All right. So, I'm really concerned with just the disparities. I'm concerned with a number of things. One is just the level of incarceration. Maryland and the entire country, we over-incarcerated, rates that no other nation, comparable nation, incarcerates around the world. And within that mass incarceration, just the racial and ethnic disparities. And I guess my question is, like, what thoughts do you have about, in this continuum of a justice system, police exercising discretion, prosecutors exercising discretion, judges having some leeway, even in the context of sentencing guidelines, there's still discretion for judges. You got probation officers exercising discretion. How much of this is, implicit bias where folks are exercising discretion in a way that's just more detrimental, right, to Black and brown people, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and I'll answer it two ways. It is hard to overstate the extent to which the societal propaganda of notions of inherent criminality impact people's ability to objectively assess circumstances when it comes to Black people, particularly Black men. So you think about, Birth of a Nation, the first motion picture film, right, depicting Black men as criminal, potential rapists, right? That is something that has societal resonance that impacts, again, our ability to objectively assess circumstances when it comes to folks in our community. And I think another example of that is that, and I mentioned it earlier, the idea of it being a rational choice for someone in a community that they deem dangerous to have a firearm, right? And I think, oftentimes the overarching discourse that we hear is, you got all these people possessing guns, with the undertone being, these are people that are just, they have a proclivity to violence, right? And so I think, so one aspect of it is that I think there does need to be a societal attempt, all those who are interested stakeholders, in really unpacking how all of those biases, that propaganda, how it impacts people's ability to not only make decisions in the context of prosecutors and judges, but even legislatively, like it impacts how we legislate the issue. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, regardless of that, what's extremely important, and one of the things that we've seen, I would say, over the past few years, is an attack on the idea of judges having discretion, right? So there have been attempts to limit the discretion of judges as a way to deal with the public safety challenges that we face, with the idea being that judges aren't giving harsh enough sentences, that judges aren't, judges are not playing their part in terms of the roles in public safety. But if we understand, one of the things that has been troubling for me is that when you think about, like, whose responsibility is it to go and apprehend a person, and responsibility to get the evidence needed to prosecute the people that are truly a danger to the community, that's law enforcement. And there's been an unwillingness to put at the feet of law enforcement the level of criticism and scrutiny that they deserve, just the level of corruption, the level of incompetence of law enforcement. I saw, And I pay attention to Fox 45 stuff because, again, they're putting out this propaganda that's driving this, this destructive narrative. There was a story that they put out the other day, State's Attorney Bates's citation docket, where, their quality of life citation docket. And the story says that, unfortunately, overwhelming majority of the citations had to be rescinded because the law enforcement that put out those citations didn't do them properly. And you hear, State's Attorney Bates basically saying they need more training. These are new police officers. See, to me, that's a cover for incompetence that law enforcement has been able to get away with. If you read the Department of Justice report from 2016 about Baltimore State's Police Department, it is their incompetence and corruption that has impacted the ability to get at public safety. So to your question around discretion, it's important that judges have discretion, where when a prosecutor makes their case, right, that a judge is able to make the discretion as to what is the most beneficial thing for the community and that individual person. And I think it's important for us to push back against attempts to limit judge discretion, because if judge discretion is limited and judges are forced to dole out harsh sentences, then we're going to have a bunch of people, I think, as we do now, who will be better served outside of prison behind bars and not being able to have the kinds of alternatives to incarceration that would be better suited. So we have to fight back against this notion that we should restrict judges' discretion. And I think, and I guess the last thing I'll say on that is, I think historically prosecutors and overcharging, their discretion has been extremely damaging. The ability to, and I think anyone who's touched the criminal justice system knows that when law enforcement comes at you and prosecutors come at you, they overcharge because they're trying to get a conviction. I'm sure you know the politicized nature of that, their conviction rates, their ability to go to folks and say, this is how many people we locked up. And so I think that, there's a role to play as it relates to thinking about how to address, the discretion of a prosecutor, but that can cut both ways, because I think we're seeing a movement around the country where there are district attorneys that are trying to use their prosecutorial discretion in ways that are not as draconian as the way the prosecutors have. So I think that piece is probably a more complex issue. But again, I think, to just reiterate, we need to retain judge discretion so that we can make sure that, we're not putting people behind bars that don't need to be.
No, I just had a comment. I think it's the approach that you had on the youngsters, because the area and environment they grew up in, you have to have a little bit more incentive to bring them in. And it's the issue about them going to school. A lot of them don't even make it to school. So all I'm saying is, when we were coming up, we had a lot of different things to keep us occupied. We had recreational centers, to keep them in school, and had more incentive for them to stay there and become more productive, so they wouldn't get to that level where they would be incarcerated. And another thing I'll speak on too is the people that's coming home from incarceration. The city is in bad shape, it needs help. So I feel as though, they have certain programs inside of, the jails where, you can build the city back up. That's the same thing, they tore it down and build it back up, You have, North Avenue is ridiculous. It's being held up by 2x4s. If you go around there, I look at from 1600 to 1610. The boards, the back of the buildings are literally hollow. The buildings are being held up by boards. If a good wind came by, it would take it down. So what I'm saying is, they need jobs when they come home. To keep them productive and keep them in the environment. So things will come back together. That's the same thing. They tore it down and build it back up. And the kids really, need somebody that's really been through something. They need men out there to teach them the way so they won't go back into incarceration. I feel as though the whole thing is not to incarcerate them, but teach them the right way so they can be productive and their families can be more productive so we have a better city.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that, because I think you raised a very important point about reentry. And, Maryland, our recidivism rate is over 40%. So in 2 or 3 years after returning to the community, 40% are back
behind bars. And you look at other states where the number is considerably lower, half the amount, 20%. What's your sense of these? You mentioned the services and to get folks back in the community, up on their feet, to help rebuild the community. Any sense on what's working, what's not working, what you think we should be focusing on?
Basically, in the inner city, I grew up around Monroe and Lafayette, and the whole area is just destroyed. So what I'm saying is, it would be good to put things there that would, get the kids involved in the areas. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And it would be more productive for them to start at a lower level. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then the people re-entering, the community have a lot to say, for kids, It's a lot of smart people that are incarcerated today. And like you say, you want to keep them outside. You don't want to keep them inside. So I would say let them help build the area back up, especially incentive for the kids, because of what I was saying, most of them deal drugs and they have a lot of income, that keeps them doing what they're doing. So, figure a way out to open their minds up, to bring them to something more productive. You know what I'm saying? Instead of being on the street. And I don't think washing windows is the answer, And it was an issue that on the harbor that was really, pretty bad, and it kind of messed up, that up. But I feel as though, you should have them in the community and more leadership. You have safe streets and all that, more programs to draw the kids in to let them understand, that, jail is not a badge that you want to put on your chest. It's something, once you mess yourself up, it's hard getting it off. Trust me. I waited a long time before I even got in trouble, and it's hard getting it off of you. So you don't want to go that route, Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Say what? No.
I do want to ask, you brought up the issue about guns and individuals carrying it for safety. Any ideas in terms of how to address that issue? Because we definitely hear it at the public defender's office through our clients. Essentially, that is the situation. Individuals who themselves have been traumatized, either been victims themselves, or simply just been in spaces and witnessed things that they probably should not have, that now have impacted their lives and their ability to maneuver on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. So what do you see in terms of solutions for that?
I mean, I would say that, I think too much attention has been put on, how to get guns, or the folks get like your clients, not enough attention on the drug traffickers, the people who are supplying the guns. And I remember being at a legislative hearing where the question was, I think it was Senator Carter asked the question, and I forget who it was to, but the question was, because there are laws around those that are trafficking illegal guns. And her question was, in the past several years, how many prosecutions have there been on the grounds of trafficking illegal guns? And I think the number was like 5 in the past, 4 or 5 years, right? So I would say we need to focus on those that are supplying, the ones that are making the money. We need to focus on, going after them instead of, again, going after folks like your clients, people who don't have the resources, who, again, to your point, they feel threatened. They've seen something, they're worried about retaliation, so they pick up a gun. That to me is the wrong approach in terms of focusing on incarcerated. And that's not to say that we should condone just people having illegal guns, but we should go after the people supplying it, not the people who are doing it out of desperation.
Can you so it could be? Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad to be here with you. I live right behind you. I go to the other barbershop around the corner. I will say this one:
My student.
in the black community, two things you don't do very easily. You don't change your church, and you certainly don't try a new barber. So the AG is one brave brother. I'm telling you that, Jaleel, you're doing a fantastic job. The first bill I opposed in the legislature in 2000 was one submitted by then Delegate Anthony Brown. I think he's a brilliant brother. I want to ask you all, before we move anywhere beyond this, this is beautiful that you come into this space, have these discussions, but could you commit to having a conversation at least twice during the 90-day session with LBS? Because they are rather informative on our behalf in the community, sort of bring them to the table, get their input on policy issues, yada, yada, yada. I think that's one easy solution we can sort of reach together. So you're saying it's up to the AG's office now to say they want it. Okay, cool. Yeah, one, I think that's the thing too. Last thing I'll say, and I'll be quiet. This is a very historic time in the state of Maryland's history. My grandchildren will look back on this day and be blown away. There are so many people who look like their grandfather and their grandmother in position of leadership. They are living the dreams of their great-grandparents that if I only had people who look like me in office someday, the conditions would change. What prevents you all in your position now from making those what would seem like radical changes in partnership with other folks of color who look like you from top to the bottom in positions of power to make those changes that truly begin to turn back the tide of how our communities have been impacted disproportionately by incarceration? What is that?
Come down.
Of the public defender, and I can affirmatively say that this here today, the Office of the Public Defender and the Office of the Attorney General in the community in this way is monumental. So I speak for myself that I don't see any impediments because we've started these collaborations in ways that have not existed before, and a willingness to dialogue and collaborate, each respecting our respective roles, but understanding that we all have the same goal in terms of uplifting community.
Well, what I would say is that it's a combination of the people. So you have, let's say we have the right people in place, right? Natasha Darteague as the OPD, very historic appointment last year. Anthony Brown as your Attorney General. We've got a governor in Westmore, I think that offers a lot of promise as we're undertaking, I think, this effort to make transformational changes in, and this is the point I want to make, a system. So it's not just people. You need people committed, willing to change a system. We often hear, like, we're a nation of laws and not of people. And we say, oh, that's a good thing, and it is. But when those laws are broken, when that system is broken, then it does take good people willing, I say good people willing to do the right thing, to make improvements, focusing on equity. But it's a system that we're all trying to work within to improve, and often find ourselves fighting against to improve. So that's the challenge. That's not the excuse not to make it happen, but that's the recognition that, like, this is a huge undertaking, a big challenge. We have the privilege of being in positions. We don't come from privilege. We have the privilege of being in a position to make a difference. And it's a broken system. We're not a system that broke last year, last decade. It broke 2 centuries ago. And we're now, and we're committed to addressing it and fixing it. And that's why we're here. And the Office of the Attorney General, under my leadership, will be in the community and listen to the community.
Good morning, and thank you so much. This is a remarkable conversation, and I love the fact that you all are out with the community, and big ups to, I agree with everything Dayvon mentioned. Leaders of Youth Struggle, they do some tremendous work. I echo the sentiments of good brother, pastor, and frat brother, Slade, mine, about having more of these type of engagements with the community. I'm not apologetic about my desire for systemic change. Piggybacking a little bit off of Dr. Slayton, we have now a historic moment in the state of Maryland. A black male in the governor's office, a black man in the AG's office, a black man in City Hall of the largest city in Maryland, and a black man president of the City Council of Maryland. And if we don't maximize this time to do something of seismic shifting impact for black people, but especially our black men, I don't ever see this moment. I would like to say it can happen again in my children's lifetime, but it will be very rare. The first ever, in fact, in any state of the union, we've never seen the precedent of black male leadership. So that's people, right? How would those people help translate to policy? I am a huge advocate. Every month, I walk from Baltimore to the White House for reparations. 42.9 miles to be exact, in one day. That takes me about 13 hours. On these feet, Route 1, starting at Carroll Park in the morning, ending at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Every time I do it, it's 83,000 plus steps that I walk. In the rain, in the snow, done it now since October of 2021, I started. My 12th one will be this September. I'm a panelist in this month at the CBC in DC. Maybe doing my walk around that time then, to bring attention to the need for reparations, right? But at the same time of black folks needing reparations, we have people in this country and their descendants who have benefited off of oppression. I met my dear friend in the U.S. AG's office, Mayor Garland. I spoke to him out recently before I came to Baltimore. Was in Tulsa, race massacre, Greenwood, destruction. First time airplanes used to drop bombs on America. I started the law that the ancestors, that now the descendants, the survivors, were trying to get reparations for. And I mentioned to him, not one charge was filed against those individuals who dropped bombs on American soil. We went to war the last two times. Pearl Harbor, 1941, we went to war. 9/11, we still in Afghanistan, Iraq area. But for the first time, not one charge was even filed. Bringing it to Maryland, there has been, is still ongoing racism that was institutionalized and put into policy. Thankfully, the Henrietta Lacks family just got a settlement, but they're just one in a host of families that have been impacted by governmental policy and institutions in this state. Can we now, in addition to advocating for reparations, also see some investigation to historical crimes that were done against black people in the state of Maryland? The Italian families just now got reparations from Germany for the Nazis taking their families' income. This happened this month in September. They got millions of dollars, right? And this was done by the court. What is it that we can do to go after, now that we're in these positions? And I agree with you, people don't change, the policies have to change. Now that we're in these positions, what is it that we can do now to repair some of the historical crimes that have been done against our people? And how can we help you in your capacities? Make sure, because you know the likelihood of this ever happening again is rare. I hope it does, but it's rare. So how can we best take advantage? How can we create the mandate? I mean, my walk is either a walk out of faith. Josh walked around the walls, Jericho, but we have people now in offices that can do some action to bring about some repair, and not just about a check, but about bringing some investigation to historical crimes that have been done, genocides that have been done against our people. And I stand in support whatever you all can come up with to make sure that those measures are met. That's all.
No, I'm listening. I can tell you that, like, for example, you know,
I know people, you know, generally speaking, don't like when we talk about, well, we got to study this because we're done with studying. You're referencing reparations, and I supported HR 40 on Capitol Hill, introduced by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And I think that's important, not because you want to punt it and kick the can down the road, but to truly understand how it is that you're going to make those reparations. You see some small municipalities around the country who are writing checks. Some say, well, does that make sense? Is that going to have meaningful, lasting change? Is there anything that we can do that's more impactful than that? So I guess in short, I would say that I've been very supportive of seeking reparations and will continue to be as Attorney General. And that is something that certainly in my position, and I know I speak for the OPD, cannot affect by ourselves. That requires a legislature, because you're talking about money, you're talking about legislation, you're talking about policy. But I've demonstrated commitment to that and will continue to be committed to that. I don't know if there's a bill or anything like that in Annapolis. There was. Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll highlight on the reparations piece, with the cannabis recreational cannabis legalization, you know, one of the things that it's important to note is that reparations for the war on drugs was something that LBS was focused on. And, you know, want to give some credit to the legislature in establishing recreational cannabis. There was also the establishment of the Community Repair and Reinvestment Fund, where 35% of the revenues from recreational cannabis will go into this fund. Each jurisdiction will get a percentage of those funds, and each jurisdiction has to pass a law that determines how they distribute those resources. Baltimore City was the first to fulfill the legislative mandate that came along with the establishment of that fund. And Baltimore passed through a city council, and the mayor signed the Baltimore Reinvestment and Reparations Commission. And so I just wanted to raise that, as, you know, there have been a variety of reparations efforts. And this is one effort where we've been able, at the very least, in terms of starting reparations for the war on drugs, that's actually something that, you know, this state has been able to deliver on. And I do want to encourage people, whether you're in Baltimore City or the jurisdictions around the state, to be engaged as to how your jurisdiction will distribute those resources to make sure they go where they're supposed to.
And I'll add on that one, when our office weighed in and supported that adult use of cannabis, the three things that I highlighted, one was that, you know, I call it the 3 E's, and the piece you're talking about is sort of, you know, empowering by funding. The community by creating that fund to invest in the communities, particularly those communities that were hit hardest in the war on cannabis, the failed war. But the other 2 E's are equitable participation in the licensing. And it looks like we're moving in the right direction to make sure that those who are going to profit and benefit from now the lawful commercial sale of cannabis, that it's, you know, a diverse group of license holders, that Black and brown communities are benefiting from that. And then the other piece, which we've wrestled with as a state for a long, long time, I know the public defender has so much experience in this area, is expanding the scope of expungements. Not only expanding the scope, but making it, you know, easier and taking the burden off of the individual who needs who seeks the expungement, but move to an environment where more of that is automatic. So those are some of the things that we weighed in our office when we supported that bill and insisted that be incorporated in the bill as it was passed.
I would like to hear from the men of the church on the issue on what do you see in terms of where the true solutions are to ending this cycle of mass incarceration. What do you do, or what does the community need from your perspective that we cut the cycle so that we don't see them in the courtroom.
The simple answer for me would be Jesus, right? But since it's not Sunday and this is not a church, quite frankly, it is sort of mending the net of those economic supports that make families strong. The removal of men from their community and from their homes is a detriment to the black family. Bottom line. So policies that impact that. It's not a big deal, but it is. We call corporate tax loopholes that allow literally hundreds of millions of dollars to leave the state of Maryland because of combined reporting. Then that money can go back into programs that impact communities that allow families. Look at the impact we had on child care because of the additional resources that came there during the pandemic. You know, families had that relief. That's a huge deal to be able to take care of a child and have that, to put more food on the table. Those basic necessities that families need to survive. If we can address those issues, I recommend, both of you are very smart, brilliant people. We got great people on your staff like Willie. Have your staff sit down and read Matthew Desmond's latest book, Poverty by America. Have a real conversation about that and look to see if some of those things are impacting policies that allow us to maintain the status quo in which we have to this day. I'm excited that both of you are in that position because I know the credibility you bring to your offices. It's not a mystery. But beyond that, Jesus, church start at 10:30 tomorrow. 4490.
Not even trying to be trite, but I would say definitely having more public defenders like yourself, who see crime as not just momentary lapses of judgment, but crime is committed over generations, by lack of investment in communities, and really disinvestment of communities. We see the headlines on the news about, a child maybe breaking and entering into his place, but you see crime happening, that child was really born in an environment that set him or her up for failure, right? You see crime, and I agree it's being set up where the easiest job is on the corner, right? You see crime set up when you put children from kindergarten through 12th grade in overcrowded classrooms, right? That's a crime. But we only file charges when the child does something, taking something from somebody else. But the crime was first committed when their parents enrolled that child into a classroom that was poorly funded. That's where crime should have happened. And so I think to change the shift, and as a church faith community, that's how we see sin, right? Sin is not so much the act to say it's not so much of killing your brother, but it's when you're angry with your brother without cause. You see the consistency, mankind sees the crime when the sin is committed. But spiritually, God sees the crime when the mental act is first done. And that's the same thing in society. And so I think to change it from a momentary judgment on somebody's decision they made in a snap second versus what led that person up to that decision and how options have been limited. Mentioning Poverty by America, Matthew Desmond, great book, speaks about how poverty produces itself by policy, right? The fact that we have a society where you cannot get SNAP benefits with two parents on the application. That's a crime. You're telling that child that they can't have two parents. And then public housing. You can't get approved if there's a mother and a father on the application. That's a crime against that child, almost making it financially more lucrative for there to be a single parent. In order for the mother to get housing, she can't have the father. So you have women now, and even don't talk about it, starting programs like that. In order to get those free programs, they can't put the baby's father on there as someone who's also in the household. That's a crime. We're forcing people between financial relief, because they're not getting rich off this system, or having a family. And so to changing those type of policies and changing even the view and perspective of what crime is, as a government, society, we perpetuate crime every first day of school. That's a crime. We perpetuate crime every day. We allow for these policies, government policies, to continue to be implemented. And taking the biblical approach and seeing crime as something that happens first in the heart, and then manifests later in the body. And as a society, we show our heart by our budget. You know, don't tell me your priorities. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you your priorities.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
Yes.
And just for the record, just like I don't leave church before it's over, I don't get out of the barber chair until it's done.
Well, I want to say thank you for inviting me. This is definitely a conversation worth having. I agree with you, good brother, that we do have to change the policy because it took more than a town hall meeting for us to get in the situation that we're in. So it's going to take more to get us out. And you don't want to spend a bunch of time intellectually describing the problem without addressing solution-based things. So, I mean, one thing would be making certain institutions increase their value. Like, it shouldn't be a PS5 at Baby Lookers. They might not even have one at home. They can, you know, go down there and play one. And then, you know, my wife is a DJ and probation officer. So I know the programs and the things are important, but you have youth that have conflict and they're going to the same program together without that conflict being addressed. So that's superficial within a sense. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take more than just, you know, come in and saying some certain things for the moment. It's going to take some real blood, sweat, and tears. And because the system has been broken for so long, so many people have become jaded, and they don't want to work harder than someone else. They don't want to be Captain America when they're a cop. They want to go under the bridge and get on TikTok like everybody else. They don't want to have, why not have to do the hard work? So more realistic change could hopefully foster and promote more people willing to be shareholders and invested in that process.
I have to run, but I will make one more last suggestion. And encourage you to sort of take the leadership. There's power in numbers. In the next 90 days, this is the words of T.I., if it ain't about the money, it ain't about nothing. You have 90 days in Annapolis to come together. You two sort of take the lead. Unapologetically, and have conversations with the Prince George's delegation, the Baltimore City delegation, LBS, NAACP, and come together and say, look, these are some things we're not moving on unless we deal with these issues. You guys can have that type of collective power. I don't think anything moves until you say move. Just like that.
Anyone else from the audience, thoughts, comments? We are listening.
Outside of criminal justice, we need to do more to collectively control our identity, and because I do feel as though as a person of color, the lowest amongst us are allowed to represent us. We'll never be representative Neil deGrasse or Ben Carson's of the world. It's always a stereotype which is unfortunate. And a lot of the popular music and media promotes and reinforces these stereotypes to children who may have a mom and dad, but now they're occupational orphans because everything is so high in life. To where for me to provide for you, not only do I have to go through my 8 hours, but I hope and pray someone else calls out so I can pick up their thoughts. And if you're being monitored by television, then what is that going to produce? What we have now, and you know, I hope and pray that I think moments like this is a good, important moment to get people to get some ideas. Because like I'm not from here, but I can see the same open air drug markets, and to have cops there with Narcan just in case someone overdoses, like that's just bare minimum. What else can we do to because Penn North is it's hard to explain to people who come from out of town that this is just Monday, but it'll be like this Tuesday as well. Anyone else?
One thing I'll add to what the brother just said, I think it's important. I mentioned it earlier. Many of those that are politically opponents of addressing the issue of mass incarceration, many of them, they trot out those really extreme stories of brutality and violence. And I think it's just really incumbent on us. I think we're so conditioned to think that, like, particularly for Black people, that we can't win. Like, we're conditioned to think that that the circumstances in our community are inevitable. And a lot of times the media, I mentioned Fox 45, like that propaganda, they're taking advantage of the hopelessness that I think a lot of people have as to our, capacity to address the issues in our community. And so I think particularly as it relates to the image of like this inherent Black criminality that gets projected to us all the time, we don't get to see enough of those other images of the majority of what's happening. Like the majority of what's happening in our community, it's not the violence, it's not the crime, right? And unfortunately, there are not enough people that know that. Like I've had conversations with people where I'll mention We Are Us that I mentioned before, and they'll say, I've never heard of them, right? It's the media's job to tell people about the work that folks are doing in terms of violence prevention, to instill an environment and to boost the morale. So people feel like there are things that we can do, there are things that people are doing. Like currently, murders and non-fatal shootings are down. But I think the environment is so toxic that the thought continues to be things are out of control, as opposed to how do we build on the progress that's been made. You know what I'm saying? People don't even feel it, right? But there are people who've been boots on the ground, who've been doing the work to address violence and crime in our community. So I think the pushing back against the media narratives that feed into the hopelessness, that feed into notions of Black criminality, the notion of inherent Black criminality, we have to aggressively counter those narratives, both in terms of the policies, but also, again, just in terms of improving our ability as a community to see the possibility of something different.
Absolutely, and I totally echo that. In fact, that especially when we talk about our Black and brown children, the majority are doing are not the ones that are publicized and that you see on the news. We have Black and brown children that are excelling in their communities, that are doing good things, but we don't promote those, and we definitely need to make that shift, because those that you see on the news being arrested for the various things do not represent the true nature of the community. Haircut looks good.
So who we applauding, the barber or the man?
I do want to take a moment and say a special thank you to all of you who welcomed us here, but a special thank you to members of the staff from the Office of the Public Defender and the Office of the Attorney General who are here supporting as well on a Saturday. So thank you to everyone.
Can we get a picture of all of the panelists? Especially if you guys got a haircut, you gotta take the cap off.
Jaleel, hand me a mic. Hand me a mic. Yeah. How we do this? Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, I thought you had an intervention for me or something. You going down? You coming downstairs?
No, I'm gonna stay up here. I'm gonna stay up here.
All right. So I got like 10 minutes or something like that.
About 5.